Hello, everyone. Today we are talking about training load, volume, and rest. So, just thinking about training load or the intensity with the weights that we're lifting, we're going to look at a combination of a few factors. One is going to be the quality of the rep. So, sometimes when we want to lift those heavier than normal weights, or when we want to do a few more reps than normal, sometimes we'll just let that quality kind of fade a little bit, and we'll kind of wiggle room. We'll have some wiggle room, and we'll kind of cheat our way up. Maybe go a little bit faster than normal, or maybe not do full range of motion, or we'll let our form break down to where we're not biomechanically really protecting ourselves, and we're just trying to get the job done. So focus on trying to maintain your quality while you're lifting for safety as well as consistency. We'll also be looking at the percentage in relation to a 1 rep max. And remember that there's an inverse relationship with volume or repetitions. So just like our work productivity goes up the longer that YouTube is down, as the load rises, the volume tends to fall. Now keep in mind that it's often, it's been said that we should be lifting maybe heavy weight for low reps for strength gains, or lighter weights for higher reps for endurance or possibly muscular hypertrophy. But that the real challenge would be to lift heavy weight for high reps. Now this is sort of a play on the idea of an inverse relationship. But just keep in mind that as our weights get heavier, as our load increases, our volume tends to decrease, and vice versa. Having a look at the chart here, this is going to give us a better idea of the relationship between different percentiles of the 1 rep max of the lift, and how many reps we could expect to be able to complete with that load. So it's kind of silly to say it, but a 1 rep maximum is 100% of what a maximal lift would be for a lifter. And if you move that weight down to 95% and ask them to lift that 95% several minutes later or on a different day, they're probably only going to get about 2 reps on it. And if they were to get 3 or 4 reps on it, then that would actually be representing a lot lower percentage of a 1 rep max, and we could change the estimate of their 1 rep max to a higher number. So to spend just a little bit more time on this, our single rep max is 100%. Our 5 rep max is going to be a little bit more like 87%. According to this chart, we'll be looking at a different chart soon. And a 10 rep max might be more like 75%. Now keep in mind that the further you get into higher numbers of repetitions, the less reliable or accurate the predictive value of that set might be. So let's take a look at another chart that tells us a little bit of the same story but has a lot more information on it. So this relative intensity table is going to tell us some of the same information that that previous chart did. We're gonna bust out the drawing toy here. So at 1 rep, we are dealing with 100% of our capability, of our maximum strength. And as the reps increase, the load decreases. But if you're looking over here at the difficulty, even though the weights may be at 72.5% of the 1 rep max, to perform 72.5% load for 10 reps is equivalent to a max 100% effort. And if you could only get it for 8 reps on a given day, then that means that maybe we need to lower that 1 rep max over here and change the predictive state, whether the training has not been going well, or you're overtrained, or you've spent too much time away from the weight room, whatever it is. But that's how we can, instead of just working up to a 1 rep max on a regular basis, we can sort of fairly accurately estimate that maybe if an athlete performs 5 reps and they say, I don't think I could have done a 6th, or maybe they actually went for the 6th and failed, then those 5 reps, whatever that weight was, is now an 87.5% predictor for what their 1 rep max actually is. And we can train off that. So we don't always have to go up to and perform a 1 rep lift for as heavy as we think we could actually do. So there's some flexibility there. And we're going to dive more into some of the values and some of the other information on this chart. So we're going to clear that out a little bit. We'll dive more into this chart in the near future, but just remember to be using this and come back to this on a regular basis. There are some extra kind of coaching tips and cues and notes over here that are going to be beneficial. And I'd say that when I see programming, probably the biggest or most common mistake I see pardon me, I had to knock out a couple sneezes there. One of the biggest or most common mistakes that I see are coaches or lifters who are training in the same range over the course of several weeks. They're not having any sort of progressive overload at all whatsoever. So they might say, hey, I want to get stronger, so I'm going to do 10 reps at 72.5%. And then they'll say, I understand that load and volume have an inverse relationship, and I want to get better, so I'm going to go down to 5 reps, but I'm going to increase to 87.5% load. And then maybe they do the same thing again. They say, I know that I want to get stronger, so I'm going to decrease my reps to 2 reps, and I'm going to increase my load to 95%. Well, what they've actually done is they would have spent each of those training sessions training in the max red zone. And so they actually have not produced any progressive overload at all. And actually, to be programming in that highest level there in that red zone over and over again is also a little risky and a little likely to cause some overtraining or some plateau of training. So let's clear that out. So let's say our lifters are actually performing that. It's really common. You'll see that they're kind of existing in that same difficulty level for several sessions. And then because they're not using the chart correctly, they'll actually dip down. And when they wanted to get harder, they actually accidentally made it easier. And the inverse of that, sometimes they want to make it easier and they actually end up going up and making it harder just because they're not understanding how to use this chart. And we're going to refer back to this several times throughout the rest of this program. So let's leave it now. Okay, so our training load, how do we determine it? Well, we can test. Again, we can actually go up to a 1 rep max, which can be kind of nerve-wracking if you have new or beginner athletes and lifters. And what might actually be a little bit safer is to focus on that quality and having a technical failure and just working them up to lighter loads and perhaps doing a set of 5 or challenging them to do 3 to 6 reps and say, hey, try not to fail. And whatever poundage they get and however many reps they get, you can then go to our charts and really easily estimate what their 1 rep max would be. And then you can program off of that 1 rep max. And once you start programming, make sure you know your goals. Make sure you understand the why behind what you are training your athletes to do or yourself. If they want to get stronger, you don't want to accidentally spend the majority of your time in the muscular endurance block. And vice versa, if an individual is attempting to get bigger or they want muscular hypertrophy, well, sticking to a strict strength training protocol, it definitely may help, but it's not the fastest route to their goal. And sometimes we don't always jump right into the zone that we're trying to train in. Sometimes we warm up to it. Sometimes we do a phase or a block of training that's helping us prepare for it. I don't know that I want all of my brand new lifters or lifters who haven't trained for a decade or so. I don't know that I want them all going in and lifting heavy sets of 2s and 3s near 90 percentile of their 1 rep max. I may be more comfortable with some lighter load, some higher reps, and an opportunity to really set the groove for the repetition form and give me an opportunity to perform some extra coaching. So that kind of ties back to your philosophy. But know your goals, and if you're not training, if you have an athlete who wants to get stronger and you're not performing quite a bit of strength work, have a really good reason for why you're not doing that. Have a game plan and know your why. And then looking at some of our load compared to our goal repetitions on this chart, in our strength phase, our strength zone, you're looking at 85% or more of a 1 rep max. And how many reps are you really aiming for there? Well, 6 reps or less. And we're gonna jump back to our previous slide and kind of talk about that 85% and 6 reps or less. So taking a look back at our chart here. Okay, so quite often individuals will see the numbers on the other chart that lead us to believe that we're pursuing 85% or more, and that's going to help make us stronger. And so they look over the left side of the chart and they draw it across. And this is not a terrible way to approach it, but if you see over on our 10 rep max, if you're training 10 rep max for 63.5% of your 1 rep max, if you're doing a set of 10 and you're using 63.5% of your 1 rep max, well, it's going to be fairly challenging. It's going to be in this moderate block, almost in the heavy block. But is it 85.5? Is it 85% and above that will help us get stronger? Not really. I mean, you can get stronger off of lifting sets of 10, sets of 20. The 1x20 that was sort of popularized by Dr. Yesus is a great program. There's lots of good rationale for it. But with the rationale that we are teaching or using for logic within this program, what we would do is we would look at 85% of the 1 rep max. So you got to be careful because 63.5% is 87.5% of the 10 rep max, but we are focused on 85% or greater of our 1 rep max. And because of that, you're going to be spending quite a bit of your programming for strength, for complex movements, and sort of this upper left triangle here. That's where we're going to spend most of our time for 85% and above of our 1 rep max and 6 reps or less. And as you can see, the least stressful there would be 85% for 1 rep, not very stressful at all. And the most stressful would be 85% for about 6 reps, which would be maximal. You'd have to be feeling good that day to actually hit that if it was pre-programmed. Or if you put a weight on a bar that you've never hit before and you did it for 6 reps, you would then have a new estimated 1 rep max. Okay, let's leave this for now. All right, so now we have a better understanding of how this chart relates back to our previous chart and how 85% or more appears on the previous chart on our relative intensity chart. and why we would stick to 6 reps or less, because 6 reps would really be maximal effort at 85%. And if we're above 85%, we're probably not going to do 6 reps. And you would follow the same patterns with the load or the intensities, as well as the repetition ranges for hypertrophy and muscular endurance. And while we're introducing charts, I thought it was a good time to bring in Prilipin's chart once again. So just a reminder, on this Prilipin's chart, the parameters are built off of data that was pulled from weightlifters. So they were doing quite a bit of total body exercises and lower body dominant exercises. And they've sort of stood the test of time, and it's not a bad place at all to start with your programming, particularly when you're training or programming compound full body exercises such as the deadlift or Olympic lifts, or lower body dominant exercises such as a squat, such as a bilateral squat of a front squat or a back squat. And once you start getting into the upper body compound exercises, this is still fairly accurate. Possibly it's probably a little bit light on the upper body exercises because you're not getting quite as much central nervous system fatigue, and also that lower back is not playing as big of a role as it is on the lower body or full body exercises. But once you know your goals, you'll know what zone that you want to train in, and that's going to give you some of your percentiles, and it's going to give you some of your reps. And then comparing those charts and that information to Prilipin's chart, you're now getting more and more logic and rationale for why you're doing what you're doing. Aside from just finding it in a magazine or a bodybuilding book, now you're starting to add in some better sort of database parameters to your training. So let's go a little bit through an example, such as a lifter who currently bench presses 220 pounds, but would like to increase the bench press numbers. Let's answer a few questions. What percentage should the athlete work at after a warm-up set? What load should he work at? How many reps should we expect for him to achieve? Okay, so there is a lot going on here, but just stick with me. We'll work through it together. Okay, so that first question was, what percentage should the athlete work at? Well, 85% and above. And I can see that yellow is going to, with the chart, yellow is going to be a bad choice. So we're going to switch over to blue. So we already talked about how the percentage of work for increasing that bench press, that lifter who bench presses 220 pounds, and they want to increase their bench press numbers, what percentage should the athlete be working at? And we already sort of highlighted and looked at where our cutoff point was for some of our 85s. And we know that we want to spend a little bit more time up in here, right? Not to say that you cannot get stronger training through some of these zones or higher repetitions, but this zone will be the fastest route to increase strength, especially for a 1 rep max or maximal lift. So we are trying to be efficient, but that does not mean that you could not come into these other ranges and accomplish some work. Just know your why and have a rationale for your approach. Okay, let's look at your next question here. After a warm-up set, what load should he work at? And I'm sorry, ladies, this applies to our he's and our hers. So after a warm-up set, what load should he or she work at? Well, we always want to warm up, especially for now training at 85%. That's fairly heavy. It's pretty reasonable that you would hit some warm-up sets in along the way. So you're going to be down and maybe hit some light sets into some moderate sets before you start going heavy, right? So you want to be nice to your lifters. You want to reduce injuries, and also know that a proper warm-up is going to boost performance as well as reduce injuries. So let's say once we're done warming up, what load should he or she work at? Well, let's look at what our estimated 1 rep max is. That's 220 pounds. And let's multiply it by 0.85, which is representing 85%. And that's going to give us 187 pounds or more. So the minimal weight, once we are working in our strength zone, in our 85% and above zone, we're going to be handling a minimal of 187 pounds. And again, that may not happen every day you go in, or even every week you go in to train. And we'll talk about that more down the road. But that's where we would focus on for our best bang for buck, directly tied to maximal strength development training, would occur with 187 pounds or more to increase a 220-pound bench press. And how many reps would we expect for him or her to achieve? So we're going to look at, on those sets, wherever we end up training on that given day, we're probably not going to be training with more than 6 reps. Again, because if we are, then we've left, that proves that we're no longer training at 85% above. Unless we've grown stronger and we're sort of surprised by the fact that we can do 8 reps instead of 6. What used to be our old 6 rep max is now 8. That would be sort of the exception. We would not want to plan on doing a lot of work with 8, 10, 15 reps. And so to answer the question, on a given set, it's going to be 6 reps or less, as we saw on this chart over here. And on a given day, if we start utilizing our Prilipin's chart, you're probably going to be looking at about around 15 reps or less, because at 85% or more, we're sort of in the middle over here, or even greater and in the 90s. Where are we going to be at? So probably our optimal reps in that 80 to 90% is 15. So we could go right to 15. And then knowing that it's an upper body day, that gives us a little bit of leeway. So maybe we could have gone up to 20. But at 15 reps, we're confident and we're feeling pretty good that that's going to be either optimal or at least in the proper range of reps. And depending on your lifter, you may want to get more aggressive or less aggressive. So using our charts, this is how we would answer those 3 questions. Let's get all my scribbles out of the way. So using our charts, that's how we would answer these 3 questions, and how we would logically create some training for ourselves or for our athletes. And again, there's so many ways to skin a cat. These charts are not the end-all be-all. They are sort of tried and true, tested and proven. There's logic, there's scientific backing. So we should feel comfortable using them and have some confidence in using them. But if for some reason you choose to dig up a new chart or use something different, then have a logic or have a rationale for why you're using it. Okay, so for our training loads, should individuals go heavy for every lift? I would say absolutely not. Not only do we want warm-up sets on given days, this allows for additional warm-up, this allows for activation, this allows for possibly some weighted mobility work, this allows for potentiation. All of those things are going to take some additional reps before we end up under very heavy loads. And then should every exercise, and this could also sort of lead to every exercise being heavy on a given day. Well, there's a difference between a truly heavy lift and a challenging lift. So would I want to go at 80% intensity on my cleans and my squats and my RDLs and my glute bridges, you could make that argument. But as we start looking at it, you kind of see that as we start discussing it that way, you can kind of see that a little bit of variation throughout the workout might actually benefit the lifter. And also, as a lifter, going in and doing 90%, going up to 90% on several different lifts on a given session is not very appealing, because after the first couple, fatigue is going to start to set in, and the emotional and the drive and the motivation starts to fade a little bit. So be thinking about how frequent lifts are taking place, what other activities are taking place, how stressful the lifting is going to be and the athlete's ability to recover, and the goals of that athlete. So to ask another question, should all sets be performed at maximal intensities? For example, would a 3x6 front squat being performed, should they all be at 85% of the 1 rep max of a front squat? Well, let's look back to our charts here, and we'll do a little bit more scribbling. Okay, so here's our question, just one more time. Let's change our color. Let's go orange here. Yeah, let's try that out. Okay, should all sets be performed at maximal intensities, such as a 3x6 front squat? That's 3 sets of 6 repetitions of front squat, or should they all be at 85%? So let's see what 6 reps at 85% looks like. So that's where we end up. We are in the red zone. We are in a maximal training zone. So this means if you're feeling good on a hard day, you're able to accomplish this. But it is equivalent to 100% of what you could do for 6 reps. So it's a challenge, and to program it ahead of time is a little risky, because you might not be able to hit it, and because as you're demanding 100% of ability to be produced. Now, how about looking at 3 sets like that? Well, keep in mind that after a heavy set and a maximal set, there's going to be a reduction in ATP within the muscles. That's the ATP PCR. So our creatine levels, our phosphocreatine levels will be dropping down, and they'll be replaced close to 100% about 3 to 5 minutes later. So let's say we wait those 3 to 5 minutes, and then we go back again for another set like that. And maybe we get it, maybe we don't. Well, now you're not only are you relying on the replacement of phosphocreatine for assisting you in fueling heavy lifts, but you also have to think that the nervous system has been challenged to a heavy front squat, a maximal front squat set for 2 sets already. So is that 3rd set likely to happen? Possibly not. The further you're going into repeating maximal sets, the less likely you are to be successful. And also, if you're able to do 3 sets of 6 of front squat at 85% of your 1 rep max of front squat, chances are you need to raise the estimate of your 1 rep max, because if you're able to successfully perform 3 sets of 6, you're probably a little bit stronger than just 1 single set of 6. Because remember, 1 single set of 6 at 85% is equivalent to the max 100%. So if we take that same lifter who was maybe able to squeak out 3 sets of 6 at 85%, and we put them in a time machine, and we told them on their first set to do as many reps as they could, well, the lifter who can do 3 sets of 6 at 85%, their first set, they were honestly probably more likely to be able to do 8 or 10 reps. And if they could have done 8 or 10 reps, that means that they were working at a different load or percentage of their 1 rep max, and that would change what their 1 rep max would be. So they would actually set a PR on that first set when they did 8 or 10 reps, and it would change the load for the day. So three sets of 6 front squat at 85%. It's arguable, and there's logic against it. You could probably make a sound argument for it, but for those reasons, I would argue against it. And then let's say in the argument you weren't allowed to use our relative intensity chart. So let's look at Prilipin's chart. Okay, so at 85%, we're sort of right in the middle there. And the optimal training reps are going to be 15 reps, and that's going to be right in the middle of our range of reps. So 3 sets of 6 front squat, it fits in that range. It's just a little bit high on the range. Let's say that's like our imaginary kind of like 18 marker right there. So for Prilipin's chart, it fits. It's not too bad. It's close to 20, but not quite. And for our training goal for strength, it fits over here. So some of your logic, depending on what you're looking at, it may support that, but for the reasons I already stated while sketching on our relative intensity chart, I would advise against it. Now, another follow-up question from 2 slides earlier would be should all types of lifts, structural, power, auxiliary, be performed at the same loads? And I would say again that there is great rationale for doing it, doing the same load and volume on multiple movements, and whether they be structural or power or auxiliary. I would say that there's an argument for it, but for some of the reasons stated earlier, I would say probably not. I would lean against that. And to dive in further on my answer there of should all types of lifts be performed at the same loads, I would bring out some of our zones, as well as looking at sort of our typical ramping up of volume throughout the lift. All right, so if we're not worried about the type of lift and we're just going to choose the similar loads, let's look at what that sort of does to our lift day. So if we're load, we've been talking a lot about strength, but let's pick some muscular endurance. So if our load is going to be at 67% for every lift on this day, I guess. So what happens when we put 67% of load on our power development movement? Let's say it's a clean. Well, that power development, that 67%, it actually doesn't fit within the suggested percentile loads for power development. And I'm confident that we would still get benefits out of performing cleans with 67% of our 1 rep max by maybe we move the bar faster than we ever have before, and we get some neurological benefits there. Maybe we get some extra technique work in, so it's not necessarily bad or a waste of time, but you're not typically or automatically going to get power development just because you're doing a typical power movement and sending your weight down to 67%. You're getting the risk that athletes are maybe just kind of phoning in the reps and just getting the job done because it's kind of like a light day, and maybe they're not putting in the same intent that they would if the weight was heavier and they were barely completing the reps. So it's arguable. So we'll put a question mark by that one. How about strength? if we've just finished our cleans and maybe we're moving to our squats, what happens when we're working at 67%? What happens when we're working at 67% in our strength block? Well, we're not even close to our strength reps, right? So if we're doing 67% for 6 reps or less, I would say many of the same things that I said about power. If we're squatting at 67% or less, or 67% for 6 reps or less, what are we really getting out of it? We could be getting some additional speed work or power output work. If the athletes are moving that weight really, really fast, that might be a good thing. We could get some extra technique work in. With a lighter load, they can control it better and feel their bodies, and it's not quite as stressful. It could also be an active recovery day. So there's benefits there. But are you developing strength? Are you sort of sitting in with the other guidelines and charts that we're looking at and using for rationalization? I would say that you're not. Doesn't mean it's a waste of time, but you're starting to look at maybe deviating from your path a little bit. And what if we do 67% on some of our complex accessories? So let's see, we cleaned and then we squatted. So let's say maybe we're doing like an RDL here. Okay, so 67% of RDLs, and we're doing sort of that 6 to 12 rep range. If we want to, we might be doing it that way. So for us, if we're doing 12, let's say we're doing 12 reps and we're doing 67%, now we're actually getting quite a bit of a challenge, and we're getting some of that hypertrophy base. If that's what we wanted it for, now we're sort of getting that hypertrophy, right? So this one, I think it checks not only all the other boxes, but it checks this box as well. And then what about our simple accessories? So let's say we cleaned and then we squatted and then we did RDLs. Well, what about simple accessories? So let's say maybe we're doing some trap shrugs, and I wouldn't necessarily I personally have never done a percentage load for trap shrugs. I'm sure somebody out there is doing it, but let's just use it for the sake of conversation, the sake of argument. So if we're going above 12 reps, on sort of our muscular endurance block within the lift, yeah, we're sort of right there, right? That's not bad. So we're fitting. So this one, yeah, let's call it a check mark, right? So you're getting something out of it there. And then what about here? Let's say you're going off and you're just going to finish the day with a bench press challenge, and they're going to say put 67% on and do as many reps as you can. And let's say you end up doing 20 reps, or it's a race to 20 reps because you're probably not going to do 67% for one set of 20 right away. So you might have to rack the bar and bring it back out or something like that. But anyways, are you getting what you wanted out of it there? Is it tough? Is it a challenge? Is it going to spark possibly some muscle growth? Is it going to be fun and maybe get teammates working against each other? Yes, possibly. So for picking sort of a load, picking a load at random, it's arguable, and you're kind of like, you have to sort of bend the logic a little bit. But again, I probably wouldn't do that. I would probably spend my time knowing why I'm doing a certain exercise and what am I chasing with that exercise in that block. And I would probably find a way to try to get my percentages at or near the suggested level. But as I'm trying to hammer home, It's arguable. As long as you have logic, that's the first step. Knowing why you're doing what you're doing, that's the first step. Okay, so coming in and training, let's say you've got a 100-pound bench press or a 200-pound squat, and you're training and you're using these different charts and you're following all the progressions and suggestions. Well, when would you ever change? Why would you ever move away from that 100-pound bench press or that 200-pound squat? How can you tell that you've grown and your body has adapted? Well, if you did some testing in the beginning, you can just perform a retest. Have a test day here and there. So if we've got college athletes, it's common that there's some testing in the beginning of the semester as well as in the end of the semester. And that testing is sometimes sort of a, crank up the rock music and work up to a heavy single and see what you've got today. And sometimes it's just as simple as integrating it into the lifts, and you say, you challenge them to do 85% for as many reps as they can, and you've simply just created a new max. You do the math that they do 85% of their old 1 rep max for 8 or 10 reps or 12 reps or whatever, and now you automatically know that they have a new 1 rep max. But while you're doing that, keep in mind that would be an open set. As far as the 2 for 2 rule, if you're working up to a weight and you're performing a set at, let's say the challenge is to do 85% for 6 reps, and you complete it, but you feel like you could have done a couple more reps. Well, if the next time you hit that weight, you still feel the same way, oh, I could have done a couple more reps, then even though we haven't performed that extra work, we may just naturally raise the predicted 1 rep max and raise some of the numbers. So if athletes are feeling good and the weights that we're nervous about that we think might crush them and really stress them out, if those weights aren't crushing them and stressing them out, then we might give them a little raise. And I put in the best way I can describe it, I put in at the bottom there, is when you're bumping weight up because an athlete has a great day in the weight room and they crush some sort of their old max, something they could only do for 1 rep, they do it for like 3 or 4 reps. I would say be stingy with your bumps. Just because you watch somebody have a stellar rock star day, don't give them every pound of progression. Because what if that day was sort of a one-off? Maybe they got a couple of great nights of sleep because there was a snow day or something random sort of happened, and they're in a better neurological or muscular state than they normally are. So what you don't want to do is have somebody come in and sort of randomly peak and have an awesome day, and then you just assume, okay, that's how strong and capable that athlete is always going to be. And then they go back to their normal schedule after that, and they come into the next training session and they get crushed by this big bonus of predicted 1 rep maxes that you've given them. So I would say be stingy with your bumps. I would say be quick to bump people, but give them smaller bumps than the math actually says. And then when people, sort of the inverse of that, when people come in and they have a terrible day, maybe they train regularly and they have a terrible day and they're not touching the normal weights that they can do for the normal reps they can do, I would say be generous with your dumps. So you don't actually want to give them a whole lot of a drop. You want to be nice to them on the way down. So you're going to be kind of mean to them on the way up and kind of nice to them on the way down. And that's because if someone's training regularly and then has a random bad day, well, maybe they got in a car accident. Maybe they're fighting with their boyfriend or girlfriend. Maybe they haven't slept well for a couple of nights. Maybe coach made them run until midnight the night before, something like that. So for me, that's what I found sort of helps guide lifters to be progressive, is that we're very quick to add weight to their predicted maxes, but we add with small weight And if they come in and they have a terrible day, we don't drop their numbers to the floor either. So small adjustments on a regular basis might be a better thing to put in italics for next time. But yeah, so just keep in mind that these humans will not always be the most consistent lifters. And because of that, we don't want to sort of ping pong their rep max estimates around. Another way that you can train or track lifts would be the total volume. So you can do repetition volume, such as the total number of reps performed during a workout session. So if they did 10 sets of 10, that would be 100 reps. You could also do load volume. So if they did 3 sets of 10 at 120 pounds, you're looking at 3,600 pounds. So the repetition volume would be 30, whereas the load volume would be 3,600. And you could track it. And then a way to progress is not just looking for increased weight, but you could also increase the repetition volume or increase the load volume. So there are ways to chase a higher stimulus and a higher challenge within a training session, aside from just adding more weight to the bar. And so you could do increasing of reps, increasing of just overall load. So if they did 3 sets of 10 at 120 this week, maybe next week you say, hey, do you think you can get 4 sets of 10? Because that's going to be a pretty good improvement, right? And then just some more examples below or at the bottom of that slide. So what are some of the benefits of multiple versus single sets? We could go on for quite a while. This is a fairly well researched topic and a fairly well argued topic. For me, I feel the benefit of the multiple sets is an opportunity to make smaller adjustments over time, whether you're increasing reps or you're increasing weight. And on a given training day, you can check in with your lifters more often and see how things are going. If they're having a crummy day, you might lighten that load and still maintain your volume, or you might maintain your load and decrease your volume. So when you have multiple sets, it gives you more options. So I like that about it. And with a single set, or maybe you're going in and you are working up to a very heavy weight, or you're doing something like as many reps as you can. It's an open set and you're doing as many reps as you can. Well, I like that too, because now you're getting a high stimulus in a more efficient and shorter period of time. And this is great for growing. This is great for growing and causing stimulus in young and novice lifters. And it's also good for maintaining fitness and capability in older lifters. And I already talked about the multiple set benefits there. And just remember, you want to keep the goal the goal. The goal is to keep the goal the goal. So while you're programming, know why you're programming. What are you programming for? What are you trying to achieve? And if you're using this chart, that's going to be a good step in the right direction to creating a program that is logical or rational, and also that has some parameters for us to create programs. Because some people, they go to the weight room or gym for a decade or 2 decades, and then if you sat down and asked them to do some programming, their mind kind of goes blank, and they might write down things that they've done in the past that work for them, but they may not be able to explain why they did it or have a rationalization for doing it. And maybe you're like a big hotshot bodybuilder, but someone needs help becoming stronger or more powerful or having better muscular endurance. So our own backgrounds are relevant and they have some good carryover into what we may do as exercise scientists. But knowing a little bit more about what is going on in the body due to different stimulus is a monstrous milestone, and basically just a cornerstone of being an exercise scientist, knowing why we're doing what we're doing. This chart alone is going to be a huge step in just aligning our training with our goals. We didn't get to spend much time talking about rest periods today. We mentioned our phosphocreatine system a little bit earlier. So when we lift heavier loads, we are using our ATP PCR energy system. So same thing happens when we sprint. And if we want those phosphocreatines to recharge and be replenished so that we can lift heavy again, or we can run another sprint quickly, you're going to end up waiting 2 to 5 minutes. Similar thing for power, because that power is going to be, they're using similar muscle fibers and they're using similar energy systems. So whether you're doing a big jump or a sprint or a heavy squat or other heavy exercises, that's why waiting 2 to 5 minutes helps us be successful. So a good strength training session is probably going to take a little bit extra time, because when we are doing strength-based sets and our most important sets of the day in pursuing strength, we probably just need more time to sit around. So if you're ever able to watch Olympic weightlifters practice their sport, they go on the platform, they do a couple of reps, and then they go sit down and hang out, and they roll out and they stretch, and it's almost like a social hour. But that's what is appropriate for them to do, because when they are lifting, they need high performance, high quality lifts that are moving quickly, possibly under heavy weights, and with excellent form, because it's sort of a dangerous sport to be throwing around hundreds of pounds or hundreds of kilograms and jumping underneath it to catch it. Growing hypertrophy, the rest period tends to be shorter because we want to traumatize the muscle into adaptation to grow more size. So we want the muscle to be trained to hold more storage of glycogen. We want it to hold more water, and by causing extra stress, we cause extra adaptation. So we won't jump into the anatomy of hypertrophy today, but essentially I think about a rope getting frayed on the outside, and that's kind of going to look like our muscle fibers when we are performing our hypertrophy work. And when we fray that rope on the outside, additional tissues come in and create thicker muscle fibers that help us perform our hypertrophy workouts. And that's one of the ways that we get bigger. There's two forms of hypertrophy. There's sarcolemmic hypertrophy and myofibrillar hypertrophy. So myofibrillar is when that rope kind of gets frayed, and sarcolemmic hypertrophy is when all the fluids and tissues go in and stretch that rope or stretch that tissue from the inside out, and then the muscle actually gets better at hosting and holding those tissues and those nutrients, those fluids and those nutrients. And then muscular endurance. Well, why do we want to go less than 30 seconds in a rest period? Because we don't actually want the muscle to rest. We want the muscle to get punished, and we want those muscles to start holding more mitochondria within them, as well as more nutrients. So when we look at our different training goals, I hope that you guys now have a better idea of why the heck we're choosing different training loads. why the heck we're doing different volumes on those, and what sort of rest periods are appropriate for that training. And remember, the goal is to keep the goal the goal. So if someone comes in and says that they want to get bigger or stronger or more powerful, be careful not to start training away from that. It's very easy to do that. You sit down to write a program, and at the top it says strength work, and then you look at the program and it just ends up being a bunch of hypertrophy work. So I would encourage you all to keep the goal the goal. Hopefully you guys can see this. I'm going to do my last little doodling of the day here. This is our last slide. But when we're applying it, when we're creating a program that's rational and logical, and it's probably going to get the job done, it's a combination of factors. Again, what we do as exercise scientists is we bring in some science, but we're also artists. We need to make things, we're not training robots. So sometimes we need to make things a little bit more fun. We need to be entertaining, not when you're teaching a class, but as a coach or as a personal trainer or whoever it is, because there's not just basic physiology in it, there's psychology in it as well. So what are we going to look for in a rational training program? I would say using something like the relative intensity chart, that time under tension and tempo table, we looked at that one. Prilepin's chart, we looked at that one today. Looking at our training cycles, aka periodization, and we're going to get into that soon in the program. We've only really skirted the topic so far. And we also want hard work in there. Another sort of downfall of learning and sharing all these slides and tables and comparing the different parameters that I'm giving is that sometimes we really forget this one. And it's kind of funny because it's the most important one. So combining the art and the science, you want to be an artist, you want to give people something hard to do that's going to challenge them, because if it doesn't challenge them, it won't change them. So make sure that we sprinkle in, we've used all this other science and all these other parameters, but if that hard work is not there, we're doing something wrong. And that's how we're going to get to a rational strength training program. Awesome, guys. Thank you. I will see you next time. And take care.